The morning they dragged Karen out in handcuffs. I stood on my porch in my bathrobe, coffee shaking in my hand. 6 months earlier, I never imagined a lawn violation notice would end with federal agents storming the clubhouse. My name is Arya, and this is how I brought down the woman who thought she owned our entire neighborhood. I moved into Willow Creek Estates 2 years ago, chasing the quiet cul-de-sac life every young professional dreams about. The houses were pristine, the lawns manicured, and the HOA newsletter promised a community built on trust and respect. What it didn't mention was Karen Whitfield, HOA president, self-appointed queen of every square inch of grass. Karen ran the board like a personal fiefdom, and everyone on our street learned to fear her clipboard. At first, I laughed off the warnings from neighbors who called her the sheriff of suburbia behind her back. I figured, how bad could one overzealous board member really be? I was about to find out. My first real encounter with Karen happened 3 weeks after I planted tomatoes in my own backyard garden. She showed up unannounced, clipboard in hand, informing me my unauthorized vegetable patch violated Section 4.2 of the bylaws. I laughed, thinking she was joking, until she handed me an official violation notice with a $150 fine attached. That was the beginning, small, absurd, almost funny. I had no idea it was only the opening move. Karen had been HOA president for 11 years, and in that time, no one had successfully challenged her. Board meetings were a formality. Karen made the decisions long before anyone else raised a hand to speak. Neighbors whispered about mysterious special assessments, sudden fee hikes, and repairs that never seemed to get finished. But nobody had proof. Karen was careful, meticulous, and always 2 steps ahead of anyone who questioned her. I decided to pay the tomato fine just to avoid conflict. My first mistake, and certainly not my last. 2 weeks later, another notice appeared. My mailbox post was the wrong shade of black. Another $200 fine. I started noticing my house was inspected more often than any other property on the street. A neighbor named Doug pulled me aside one evening, warning me that Karen targets people who don't bow down. Doug had fought her once over a fence height dispute and lost his case, along with $3,000 in legal fees. She has a lawyer on retainer, Doug muttered. The HOA account pays for it. Our dues. That sentence lodged itself in my brain like a splinter. Our dues? Paying for her personal legal muscle? I started paying closer attention at the next HOA meeting, sitting quietly in the back row, watching everything. Karen ran the meeting with theatrical charm, smiling for the cameras while cutting off anyone who challenged her numbers. When a resident asked about the reserve fund balance, Karen deflected with a joke and moved to the next agenda item. Nobody laughed. But nobody pushed either. The silence in that room told me everything about the fear she'd built. I began quietly documenting everything: dates, notices, fines, and the strange gaps in the HOA's public financial reports. It started as curiosity. By the 3rd meeting, it had become something closer to an investigation. My neighbor Priya, a retired accountant, noticed me taking notes and asked if I suspected something was wrong. "The numbers don't add up," she whispered. "I've seen embezzlement before. This smells the same." That single sentence turned my quiet frustration into a mission. I needed real answers, not just suspicion. Priya agreed to help me cross-reference the HOA's public filings against the fines and assessments collected each quarter. We met in her kitchen after dark, spreading printed statements across her table like detectives building a case wall. The first red flag: a landscaping contract billed at triple the market rate, paid to a company with no online presence. The second red flag: that company's registered address matched Karen's brother-in-law's home, 3 streets over. I felt a chill. This wasn't overzealous rule enforcement. This was a family business disguised as a homeowners association. We needed more than suspicion. We needed documents, records, something that couldn't be laughed off in a meeting. So I filed a formal records request, citing state HOA transparency law, demanding full access to financial statements. Karen denied the request within 24 hours, citing a vague board confidentiality policy that didn't exist in our bylaws. That refusal was the moment I stopped seeing this as a nuisance and started seeing it as a war. I contacted a real estate attorney, Marcus Chin, who specialized in HOA disputes and shady board practices. Marcus listened to my story, leaned back in his chair and said, "This is more common than you'd think, and more illegal." He explained that HOA boards had a legal duty to disclose finances to any dues-paying member upon request. Denying my request wasn't just rude. It was, potentially, a violation of state law we could use against her. Marcus agreed to help me build a case, but warned it would take patience, evidence and airtight documentation. "Karen sounds smart," he said. "She won't leave obvious tracks. You'll need to catch her in her own paperwork." I started attending every single HOA event, every meeting, every community function, watching Karen's every move. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Karen wasn't stupid, and she clearly sensed I'd stopped being an easy target. The fines against my house tripled in frequency. Suddenly my perfectly edged lawn was uneven and unsightly. I paid each one without complaint, smiling at Karen every time, letting her believe she still had the upper hand. Behind that smile, I was building a folder, a growing archive of every unfair notice, every strange payment. One evening, Doug called me in a panic. Karen was pushing a new, emergency special assessment of $2,000 per household. The reason given: critical roof repairs on the clubhouse. A building that, as far as anyone knew, had no roof damage. I drove past the clubhouse that night with my phone camera, photographing a roof that looked freshly replaced already. That was twist number one. The emergency repair had apparently already happened, paid for, but never actually needed. I brought the photos to Marcus, who raised an eyebrow and said, "Now we're getting somewhere. Keep digging." The community meeting to vote on the new assessment was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at 7. I knew I had to show up prepared, because Karen would fight dirty and I needed hard evidence in hand. The clubhouse was packed that Thursday. More residents than I'd ever seen at a single HOA meeting before. Word had spread about the roof assessment, and people were finally starting to ask uncomfortable questions out loud. Karen opened the meeting with her usual warm smile, thanking everyone for caring about our beautiful community's future. When she introduced the roof assessment, I raised my hand and asked to see the itemized repair invoice. Karen's smile flickered, just for a second, before she recovered and said the invoice was still being finalized. 066 foot. I stood up and shared my photos, time-stamped from 4 days earlier, showing a roof that already looked brand new. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone in the back muttered, "Wait, so what exactly are we paying for?" Karen tried to spin it, claiming the photos showed temporary patchwork, not the full repair the assessment covered. But Priya stood up next, holding printed financial statements, and asked why last year's reserve fund had mysteriously shrunk. The room fell silent. Karen's co-treasurer, a quiet man named Frank, shifted uncomfortably in his folding chair. "I think," Priya said carefully, "we deserve a full, independent audit of this HOA's finances, effective immediately." Several residents nodded, murmuring agreement, emboldened by the fact that someone had finally said it out loud. Karen, sensing the room slipping from her grip, quickly adjourned the meeting, promising answers at the next session. But something had shifted. For the first time in 11 years, Karen Whitfield looked genuinely rattled. Walking to my car, Doug caught up to me, grinning. "You just did what nobody's dared to do in a decade." I didn't feel triumphant, though. I felt exposed, like I just painted a target on my own back. Sure enough, 3 days later, I received a certified letter, a lawsuit threat for defamation, against Karen personally. Marcus read the letter and actually laughed. "This is a scare tactic. She has no case. But it means we're close." Close to what? Exactly? I still didn't know. But Karen's panic told me the rot went deeper than fake invoices. I asked Priya to dig further into the landscaping company tied to Karen's brother-in-law, digging through public business records. What she found stopped me cold. The company had been paid over $340,000 across 3 years for seasonal maintenance. Our entire neighborhood's landscaping budget, by comparison, should have cost roughly a third of that amount annually. Twist number 2, the company wasn't just overbilling us, it barely existed outside of paperwork and invoices. No trucks, no employees, no reviews, no other clients. Just a name, a bank account, and Karen's signature approving every payment. I felt sick. This wasn't mismanagement. This was a calculated, years-long scheme to drain our community dry. Marcus advised me to keep everything quiet for now, warning that going public too early could tip Karen off. If she suspects we have real evidence, he said, she'll shred records, empty accounts, disappear the money entirely. So I played the good, apologetic neighbor, sending Karen a polite note clarifying my comments at the meeting. She responded coldly, dropping the lawsuit threat. Clearly relieved I seemed to be backing down quietly. Behind the scenes, Marcus filed a formal complaint with the state's HOA Oversight Division, citing financial irregularities. We also reached out to a local investigative journalist, Renee Vasquez, who'd covered HOA corruption cases before. Renee was skeptical at first. She'd heard 100 angry homeowner stories that fizzled into nothing substantial. But when I showed her the landscaping contract numbers, her expression changed completely, sharp and focused. "This isn't a neighborhood dispute," she said slowly. "This looks like organized financial fraud. I want in." Renee began her own quiet investigation, pulling county records, business licenses and bank filings tied to Karen's family. Meanwhile, life at home grew tense. Fines kept arriving. My car was parked improperly in my own driveway. My wife, Sana, started asking if this fight was worth the constant stress creeping into our daily lives. "It's not just about us anymore," I told her. "Every family here is paying for Karen's greed. Someone has to stop it." Sana squeezed my hand. "Then we finish this together. But be careful, people like her don't go down quietly." She was right. And soon, Karen would prove exactly how far she was willing to go to protect her secret. Renee's research uncovered something explosive. Karen wasn't just skimming from landscaping. She controlled 3 shell vendors, pool maintenance, security patrol and community events, all routed through companies linked to her extended family. Twist number 3, even Frank, the co-treasurer, appeared to be receiving quiet kickback payments to stay silent. Suddenly, his nervous silence at that meeting made painful, obvious sense. He wasn't just weak, he was complicit. I felt a strange mix of anger and vindication. This wasn't paranoia. This was exactly what Priya had suspected. Marcus said we now had enough for the state to open a formal investigation. But we needed one more thing. "We need someone inside," he said. "Someone with access to the actual bank statements, not just public filings." I thought of Frank immediately, guilty, nervous Frank, who looked like a man drowning in his own bad choices. Approaching him felt risky. But if he flipped, it could unravel Karen's entire operation from the inside out. I found Frank alone at the community mailbox one afternoon and I decided to take a calculated gamble. "I know about the kickbacks. Frank," I said quietly. "You can keep protecting her. Or you can protect yourself." His face went pale. For a long moment, he just stared at the ground, saying nothing at all. "She said if I ever talked, she'd claim I forged the signatures myself," he finally whispered, voice shaking. Twist number 4. Karen had been forging board approvals, using Frank's signature stamp without his full consent. That single admission changed everything. Frank wasn't just a coward. He was, in some ways, another victim. I connected Frank with Marcus that same night and he agreed to cooperate, terrified but finally ready to talk. Frank handed over years of internal bank statements he'd secretly kept copies of, just in case, he admitted. The numbers were staggering. Over 4 years, nearly $1.8 million had flowed through shell companies tied to Karen's family. Marcus's hands actually trembled slightly as he reviewed the documents. "This isn't a civil case anymore. This is criminal." He immediately contacted a contact at the state attorney general's office who handled HOA and nonprofit fraud cases. The attorney general's office moved faster than any of us expected, opening a formal fraud investigation within days. Renee's article dropped the same week, exposing the shell companies, the forged signatures and the missing reserve funds. HOA president accused of multi-year financial scheme ran across local news stations by that evening. Willow Creek Estates, our quiet little cul-de-sac paradise, suddenly had reporters camped outside the clubhouse gates. Karen, predictably, denied everything, calling the accusations a smear campaign by disgruntled, rule-breaking residents. She specifically named me in her public statement, claiming I'd fabricated evidence out of personal spite over fines. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if the investigation stalled? What if she talked her way out again? Marcus reassured me. Karen's problem isn't public opinion anymore. It's federal wire transfer records. Those don't lie. Twist number 5. The Attorney General's office discovered the shell companies had moved money across state lines. That detail escalated the case beyond state jurisdiction, pulling in the FBI's Financial Crimes Division almost immediately. I remember the exact moment I got the call from Marcus. His voice unusually excited for a normally calm man. "They're building a wire fraud case," he said. "Interstate transfers. Forged documents, this is federal territory now." Karen tried one last desperate move, rushing an emergency board vote to dissolve financial records for storage reasons. But Frank, now cooperating fully, tipped off investigators the same day and a preservation order was issued instantly. Twist number 6. The investigators discovered Karen had already opened a private account labeled Whitfield Contingency Fund. Nearly $600,000 sat in that account, quietly siphoned over years, clearly meant as her personal escape cushion. The community, once terrified into silence, now buzzed with fury, disbelief and something close to collective vindication. Neighbors who'd never spoken to me suddenly stopped by, thanking me for finally standing up to her tyranny. Doug hosted an impromptu block party, half celebration, half nervous energy. As we waited for the investigation to conclude, Karen, meanwhile, grew increasingly erratic, sending frantic emails accusing various board members of betraying her trust. One email, accidentally sent to the entire resident list instead of just the board, revealed her panic completely. "They can't prove intent," she wrote. "Everyone just needs to stay quiet and this will blow over. Trust me." That email became Exhibit A, practically confessing consciousness of guilt to anyone who bothered to read between the lines. Marcus forwarded it directly to the investigators, who reportedly could barely contain their satisfaction reading it themselves. Meanwhile, Priya and I kept digging, this time into the community events shell company Karen also controlled. Twist number 7. That company had billed for a 4th of July fireworks show that never actually happened. Residents remembered clearly, the show was canceled due to weather that year, yet the invoice showed full payment. $22,000? Gone. 4 fireworks that existed only on paper and in Karen's carefully forged approval. Each new discovery felt like pulling another thread from a sweater that had somehow held together for 11 years. The investigation team requested a formal meeting with affected residents and dozens of us showed up, ready to testify. I brought every folder, every photo, every fine notice I'd collected since that first ridiculous tomato garden violation. The lead investigator, Agent Reyes, thanked me specifically, saying my early documentation had significantly accelerated their timeline. Hearing that, after months of stress and sleepless nights, felt like the first real breath I'd taken in weeks. Sanaa hugged me tightly that night. "You didn't just fight for us," she said. "You fought for this whole street." But the investigation wasn't finished. Karen still had allies, resources and a lawyer determined to protect her freedom. Her attorney tried to argue the missing funds were accounting errors, not intentional fraud, hoping to soften potential charges. Twist number 8. Forensic accountants found a spreadsheet on Karen's home computer explicitly tracking personal skim totals. The spreadsheet, recovered during a lawful search, detailed exact percentages taken from every single vendor contract. It even included a tab labeled Cover Story, listing excuses prepared in advance for each fraudulent transaction. That single file effectively ended any argument that this had been accidental mismanagement rather than deliberate theft. News of the spreadsheet leaked and Karen's carefully maintained public image collapsed within a matter of hours. Former allies on the board scrambled to distance themselves, releasing statements claiming they'd always had concerns about her. Frank, meanwhile, formally signed a cooperation agreement, testifying in detail about the forged signatures and hidden payments. His testimony, combined with the spreadsheet and wire transfer records, built an almost airtight case against Karen. I started to feel something shift inside me, not just anger anymore, but a strange, tired sense of closure approaching. Still, Karen remained defiant publicly, posting on the community app that she was the victim of a witch hunt. Some longtime supporters still believed her, insisting the whole neighborhood had turned against a woman who just cared too much. It was infuriating to watch. But Marcus reminded me that public opinion wouldn't decide this case. Evidence would. The federal grand jury began reviewing evidence quietly, a process that Marcus warned could take several more weeks. In the meantime, life in Willow Creek Estates felt suspended, everyone waiting, watching, wondering how this would end. Then, unexpectedly, twist number 9 arrived. Karen's brother-in-law, facing his own exposure, agreed to cooperate as well. He revealed that Karen had pressured him into the scheme years earlier, threatening to expose an old family debt. It didn't excuse his participation, but it painted a fuller, messier picture of how deep Karen's manipulation ran. Even people close to her, it seemed, had been coerced, controlled and quietly terrified into silence for years. Renee published a follow-up article detailing the brother-in-law's statement, further eroding what little public support Karen had left. Board members resigned one by one, until only Karen remained, isolated, defiant and increasingly desperate for an exit. She attempted to sell her house quietly, listing it under a family trust, apparently hoping to relocate before charges dropped. Agent Reyes later told me this attempted sale actually strengthened the case, suggesting consciousness of flight risk. A judge issued a temporary asset freeze, blocking the sale and locking down every account connected to Karen's name. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I let myself believe justice might actually be coming. The morning it finally happened started like any other. Quiet streets, sprinklers running, coffee brewing in my kitchen. Then I heard sirens. Real ones, multiple vehicles, turning onto our street with an urgency I'd never witnessed here. I stepped outside just in time to see federal agents surrounding Karen's house. Weapons holstered but presence unmistakable. Neighbors poured out of their homes, phones raised, watching the scene unfold like something from a television drama. Karen appeared at her front door in a bathrobe, confusion quickly turning into panic as agents approached with a warrant. "This is a mistake," she shouted, voice cracking. "I've done nothing wrong. This is harassment, pure harassment." Agent Reyes calmly read the charges aloud: wire fraud, embezzlement, forgery and money laundering, among a growing list. Twist number 10 arrived right then. 2 additional board members, previously thought innocent, were also placed under arrest. It turned out the entire Inner Circle board had known, benefited, or actively participated in the years-long scheme. Karen was handcuffed on her own perfectly manicured lawn, the same lawn she'd once fined a neighbor for overgrowing. The irony wasn't lost on anyone watching. Someone in the crowd actually laughed, sharp and disbelieving, then fell silent. As they walked her to the car, she caught my eye across the street and for once, she said nothing. There was no clever excuse left. No clipboard, no bylaw to hide behind. Just silence and the weight of consequence. I didn't feel joy exactly, watching her go. I felt something heavier, quieter, relief tangled with genuine sadness. 11 years of fear, control and quiet theft, ending not with a meeting, but with handcuffs on a Tuesday morning. Doug found me on the sidewalk afterward, still in my bathrobe, staring at the empty driveway across the street. "You did this," he said simply. I shook my head. "We did this. All of us." Finally speaking up together. In the weeks that followed, the full scope of the fraud became public. Nearly $2.1 million stolen over 11 years. Every homeowner in Willow Creek Estates had unknowingly funded fake fireworks, phantom repairs and a criminal family enterprise. The state appointed an emergency receiver to manage HOA finances while a new, transparent board could be properly elected. Priya was among the first to volunteer for the new board, determined to install real oversight and public audits. I declined a board seat myself, exhausted, but agreed to help draft new transparency bylaws requiring public financial reporting. Frank, due to his cooperation, avoided prison time but received probation and a lifetime ban from any HOA leadership role. Karen's brother-in-law received a reduced sentence for his cooperation. though his business and reputation were completely destroyed. Karen herself refused every plea deal offered, insisting on her innocence all the way through jury selection. The trial, when it finally came, felt almost anticlimactic after everything we'd already uncovered and endured together. Prosecutors laid out the spreadsheet, the shell companies, the forged signatures, and Frank's detailed, credible testimony. Karen's own attorney reportedly urged her to accept a plea, but she refused, convinced she could charm the jury. She took the stand herself, calm and composed, insisting the entire case was built on jealous, misinformed neighbors. On cross-examination, the prosecutor simply read aloud her own cover story spreadsheet tab, line by damning line. Her composure finally cracked. Right there on the stand, in front of the same community she'd controlled for years. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on every single count against her. Karen Whitfield was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison, along with full restitution ordered for every affected homeowner. Her house, frozen since the arrest, was sold at auction. Proceeds redirected toward repaying the community's stolen dues. Standing in that courtroom, hearing the sentence read aloud, I finally let out a breath I'd been holding for months. It wasn't triumphant or cinematic. It was quiet, exhausted, and deeply human relief washing over the whole room. Sanaa squeezed my hand tightly beside me. "It's over," she whispered. "We can finally just live here in peace." Outside the courthouse, Renee approached for one final interview, asking how it felt to finally see justice served. "It doesn't feel like victory," I told her honestly. "It feels like we finally stopped being afraid of a clipboard." That quote ran in the paper the next day, and strangely, it resonated with people far beyond our little street. Emails poured in from other neighborhoods dealing with their own controlling HOA boards, asking how we'd fought back. Marcus started fielding calls from other communities and eventually built an entire practice around HOA fraud litigation. Priya's new transparent board implemented quarterly public audits, a real reserve fund, and an actual open-door policy. The fake landscaping company, the fake fireworks vendor, all of it dissolved, replaced by real, accountable local businesses. Life in Willow Creek Estates slowly returned to something resembling normal, though the scars of those months lingered. People still occasionally glanced nervously toward Karen's old house, now owned by a friendly retired couple from Ohio. My tomatoes, the ones that started this entire saga, grew wild and unbothered that summer, finally left in peace. I harvested them slowly, one by one, thinking about how something so small had unraveled something so enormous. Doug joked that the neighborhood should name a variety of tomato after me. Half serious, mostly just grateful. I laughed for real. The first easy laugh I'd had in what felt like an entire lifetime of stress. But justice, I learned, always comes with a cost, and ours wasn't paid only in money or stolen fireworks. Frank, despite avoiding prison, lost his marriage, his friendships, and years of trust he could likely never fully rebuild. The community itself lost something too, an innocence, a naive belief that neighbors would never truly betray each other. Even Karen's own children, innocent in all of this, had to grow up carrying a name now forever tied to scandal. I thought about that sometimes, late at night. The ripple effects reaching people who'd never asked for any of it. Justice had been served, undeniably, completely and publicly, but it left behind quiet wreckage nobody could fully repair. Still, when new families toured empty houses on our street, agents proudly mentioned our transparent, resident-run HOA now. Small comfort, maybe, but real. Something better had grown from the wreckage Karen left scattered across our community. I still keep that first ridiculous $150 tomato violation notice, framed, hanging quietly in my home office as a reminder. Some fights start over the smallest, most absurd things, but they can end up changing an entire community forever.